While COP29 is over, it failed in almost every way on the issues of emission reductions and the commitment to phase out fossil fuels, making everyone furious. Talks were often described as deeply disappointing. The climate finance deal agreed on was called a travesty of justice that should not have been adopted. It came to an upsetting close early this Sunday morning when negotiators struck an agreement with a pledge of just $300 billion annually to developing countries, which with inflation is just barely more than the $100 billion it was a decade ago. Delegates were forced to either agree or let the talks fail altogether. I know it's important to be positive in reporting on climate, but sometimes the news just sucks. For the third year in a row, I tried so hard to get there. I thought I had a spot lined up with an organization, and we were all stunned when their numbers were cut from 10 to 2. I started reaching out to friends in other organizations, only to find that the same thing had happened to them. I contacted 20 organizations with no luck. Missing it again really hurt. There were 1,773 fossil fuel lobbyists attending, and COP29 has been described as strangled by the second highest attendance of fossil fuel lobbyists on record after COP28 last year. Imagine how much better it would have been if just 1/10 of those 1,773 spots were given to kids, asking delegates to be as ambitious as possible to protect their futures. It has now been in a petrostate, which means a country whose economy is heavily dependent on oil and gas, for the third year in a row, following talks in Egypt and Dubai with Azerbaijan's President Ilham Aliyev describing oil and gas as a gift from God. Even before it started, the CEO of COP, Elnur Sultanov, was caught making deals with fossil fuel lobbyists. UN climate chief Christina Figueres said the COP process is no longer fit for purpose, and that countries that do not support the phasing out of fossil fuels should not be able to take up the presidency. Canada's Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault said the presidency's lack of ambition was deplorable, even though he brought oil producers Suncor and Tourmaline. I think after 29 years of including oil and gas lobbyists, that anyone with ties to oil and gas should be banned from the next set of talks, so we can see how we do without them. Right now, the UN has reported that we are on track for an unlivable 2.6 to 3.1 Celsius of warming, and Global Energy Monitor has said that the fossil fuel industry aims to pump 31 billion new barrels of oil across 64 additional new oil and gas fields, despite the fact that the International Energy Agency has urged countries to halt new oil and gas projects, saying that this is the only way to keep 1.5 alive. Antonio Guterres said rich nations responsible for by far the largest share of global emissions must do the heavy lifting. But unfortunately, Canada still gave more than $18.5 billion in financial support to oil and gas companies last year. They talk a good talk, but then they do the opposite. Guterres also said record emissions mean record sea temperatures, supercharging monster hurricanes. Record heat is turning forests into tinderboxes and cities into saunas. Record rains are resulting in biblical floods. This past February, scientists said the world's average temperatures were higher than the 1.5 global warming limit for 12 consecutive months for the first time in recorded history. Developing nations have demanded $1.3 trillion per year to address the climate crisis they did not cause. This sounds like a lot, but oil and gas made $2.4 trillion last year. A tax of 50% of their profits would pay for this. The world currently gives $7 trillion annually in fossil fuel subsidies globally. This COP was so disappointing. I almost feel glad I didn't waste my time, money, and carbon getting there. But I remember the good guys have to keep fighting, no matter how many times they get knocked down. We still need to work to turn this around. Every fraction of a degree of warming will save millions of lives. Big changes need to be made, both to the way COPs happen and to the next set of texts. For goodness sake, what is wrong with everyone? Don't they know how close we are to disaster? In the history books, and let's make a goal to actually have history books, they're going to say, we were teetering on the edge at this time, and this was the best they could do. Shame on you, COP29. You let us kids down. Leaders of the EU, UK, and China suggested that their countries would be willing to step into a larger climate leadership role in light of Trump's election in the US. The upcoming COP30 in Brazil is now being called a major moment for increasing global efforts to cut emissions. To all of you countries out there, it's time for new leaders. Will you answer the call to save our planet? We need you now, more than ever. See you in Brazil. I call a do-over. Get ready to fight.